Okay, perfect. We made it. We did it. We figured it out together. Teamwork makes the
Yes,
dream work. Thank you so much. I appreciate you
glad to
being
be
on
here.
here and making it. And oh, what a day. What a day. We've gone this far. Um, First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for making it to me today and all your travels and everything that we've been through today. And I'm so appreciative of meeting you and honored to have you on my podcast. And typically, I like to kick it off with just kind of introducing yourself and a little bit of who you are and what you're all about. So if you'd like to jump into that, I'd be honored to listen.
Happy to share. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Thank you.
So, my name is Samson Love, and I'm a yoga instructor and massage therapist. And I'm really into divinity, mindfulness, mediumship, compassion, and all the different ways that people express that in the world. And I'm also really interested in the potential of higher consciousness and community. So, I've got my fingers in so many different areas of study related to all that. But that's really my passion, is to connect to divinity beyond the individual dogmas of what that might mean and relate to people from that place and broaden people's connection to that in general.
Mhm. And what kind of massage therapy do you study? A particular technique or what? Are you going to a
So
certain school?
I did go to Healing Hands. I have my certification from there.
Hmm.
And I've been practicing in different contexts for a really long time since I was a kid. So there's many modalities of energy healing and massage that kind of come together in my work. One that I'm especially fond of is Chini Song, which means internal organ massage.
Okay.
And in that, one is massaging the stomach area and encouraging digestion and peristalsis. But it's said that there's a whole second set of neurons in the stomach, and also that consciousness is propagated in like peace or nervousness from the constituents of the microbiome of the stomach, like the
Mhm.
healthy and unhealthy bacteria involved in digestion and other things. So when I'm working there, I'm working with the subconscious, I'm working with the lineage, I'm working with the soul, I'm working with the epigenetics, and it's a lot more than just a massage, but it's also energy healing and consciousness.
Well, I think it's more of like a scientific fact these days, right? I mean, I see more and more like, science-based facts just on the gut and the biome and the interrelation to the entire body. I mean, it was just 10 years ago, it seemed like it was one of those like, oh, it's kind of, it might be true kind of thing. But now I think we're starting to under so much more of how it's interrelated, not only organ but almost like a giant living other mechanism in our body that like I always feel like sometimes we're like just bits and pieces of the world around us, and our digestion system is just another reflection of maybe like another gigantic worm living in our system that we have to take care of, you know, that thinks like, it incorporates the thought process of also our brain, right? But also is so much a part of our digestion and the interrelation and functionality of so many other parts of our body as well.
I like the metaphor of digestion, like how are we digesting our thoughts and our emotions and the happenings in our lives? Because then it's more than just your food and a way of
Hmm.
assimilating energy. It's a way of assimilating consciousness on many frequencies.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So, I'm very into massaging my organs. I've had some Rolfing done, I guess, if you will. Is that kind of like the same thing or a little bit different or
It's a
what?
different technique, it's a
Oh,
different
okay.
type of kneading, but it's still wonderful.
Yeah, it was when I had that done, I had some herniated discs and they said that the gentleman that I went to wasn't really able to access stuff from the back. So he had to go in from the front to access these discs, and he had to move my organs out of the way. And it was a long process of putting pressure and moving stuff around so he could actually access the front side of my back, which was intensely painful, but it also came, there was a lot of relief and healing that came from that as well. But you want to explain to people about like the whole massage of the actual organs themselves?
Partially, yeah. So the stomach is known as a common hack for the back. Like if you're having trouble releasing a tension that's related to the spine or the back, upper back, lower back, mid back, but especially the mid and lower back, then working through the stomach and the solar plexus allows one to release those things from a different angle of approach.
Mhm,
And then I think emotional alchemy is one of the things I'm most interested in.
mhm,
Like, but I'll start with the physicality and the elemental energies of organs. So in Chinese medicine, it says there's an element and an emotion, along with many other things, associated with each organ. And in knowing that, you can stimulate the organ to balance those emotions, and you can know if there's, say, an excess of energy or too much energy. That might mean too much anger, or too much sadness, or too much joy, which I guess there is a thing according to
mhm.
Chinese
Of
medicine.
course.
And
Yep.
then you can balance that out and kind of redirect excess energies to depleted energies. And deeper than the emotional energies that correspond to physical ailments and health, there's these subtleties of the psychology and these subtleties of the feeling choices we make inside of our consciousness that it seems like is a more isolated world. But in fact, on your ears and in your eyes and on your face and your hands and your tongue, there's an entire map, like a microcosm of the organs. And learning about that through acupressure, where you don't need needles like in acupuncture, you can stimulate and bring balance to any of these systems. And it's
Mhm,
really fun at first just to kind of like learn the tricks and the life hacks. But if you're like me and you have a passion for it, then you want to go deeper and learn how to help others and learn more of the minutia of why it works and how it works and some of the related points.
mhm,
That, in addition to sound healing, in addition to herbal medicine and psychology, kind of brings together this practice of how to open the channel of mediumship and connect to higher consciousness by balancing one's being. And you can open mediumship through stimulation as well, but they call that vata derangement, like having psychic information coming through because you're stimulated and then it's kind of filtered through your ego and not as accurate, like fear or excitement, flavoring the way that you interpret the information. But when you're able to find peace and stillness, then you can clearly interpret psychic information or you can give healing energy without being sticky and causing attachments. So there's
mhm.
a real beauty to this foundation of the inner balance of the mind, heart, body, and spirit.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you. I saw a really cool practice recently. I think it was like Indonesia, where they had it was like acupressure, but it was also like they had like when they were putting their fingers down, they were also putting frequency like through their fingers and like electricity. And this guy was describing, and he said it was almost like a like electroshock by the way they're approaching it, by like their fingers pressing into certain spots. I don't remember the exact like the terminology they used, but it was really cool like the way the guy was describing it. And I've never really learned that much about that particular one, but it sounded really cool, you know.
Could be nerves and pressure points, but it could also be chi. If you
Mhm.
ever seen a YouTube video about Zhang Cheng, how
Mhm.
he kind of set the paper on fire and he would do these little chi touches and then people would twitch and it would feel kind of like it burns, but he could help
Yeah.
people to find health. There's this whole dogma about his master getting upset that he was sharing that stuff in the public eye, but then it said that all the powers came from meditation and a spiritual lineage, and
Mm.
that was pretty cool. And my standpoint is, there's promises and integrity and lineages, and I believe in protecting confidence, but I also believe in sort of free information technologies, and
Mm.
some of those technologies are metaphysical as opposed to just physical. And it's a technology like Kriya Yoga, for example, where you want people to use it responsibly. You want to kind of like a driver's license or a gun license or something like that. You want people to know, okay, I'm applying certain morals and standards of skill before I'm wielding this power. But it is great for anybody to be able to study those morals and standards of skill and see if they can agree to it, and then just have access. And some
Hmm.
things like prayer and meditation, I don't think you need much of a training or a license. It's just beautiful and beneficial. And then some things like deeper practices come with a greater responsibility, and
Yeah.
you'd want to understand that someone has honor before you give them access to great power.
Yeah, that's a really good conversational piece. I mean, I definitely think there's a balance to all things, and I think that I'm truly a believer in, the freedom of speech and the giving of information. At the same time, I think that there are certain higher practices that need to be sought out, and those shouldn't be necessarily readily available for everyone. It's mm, yeah, it's a difficult one because I feel like, there are certain practices out there like that potential, like the kind of like the one we're talking about, um, you know, needs to be sought out by that particular person. Um, yeah, it's kind of hard to describe. I don't know. Now that like now that it's like stirring in my head, I'm like, I've had many different teachers tell me that, there has to be a seeking in order to find, and it shouldn't be necessarily in front of you to find. At the same time, it can be, like a lot of things are, the answer is usually right in front of you, so to speak. But at the same time, like you have to find it, and usually some of the most insightful things take a lot of effort to seek, I guess, if you will. So,
The phrase that comes to mind is the doctor lives inside the patient's pain.
mm, I
Like
remember you saying that before. Yeah.
right,
Yep.
it might be right there, but to admit it, to work with it, to sit with it and find the medicine as opposed to, avoiding it or criticizing and resisting it,
Mm.
that's kind of the test, or the must be this tall, must be this spiritually mature, whatever, to ride the ride.
Mm-hmm.
And then if somebody is like a ripe fruit and they're ready for a wisdom transmission, they'll sit with their pain, or they'll seek out greater knowledge that might imply greater responsibility, and not being able to just blissfully go along and pretend that some things that people wave away as conspiracies or ignore aren't
Mm-hmm.
happening in our society. But it's like, do you really want to just be haunted by things when you're already overwhelmed by basic life, or do you want to use those things in service and be grateful to know them and feel ready? So it's not blind censorship. It's just kind of like a way of cataloging information systems to meet people where they're at, and not kind of like crusade people and like do pressure sales for information,
Mm-hmm.
even if it would be for their own good. And you have the science or the psychology or the soul sight to be like, this is what's going to benefit this soul. Even if you're right, the next question is, are they ready for it? Do they consent to it? Instead of just like blasting along. And it's
Yeah.
pretty tough sometimes to watch the people that you love suffer, or even watch your own subconscious suffer and be like, no, I need to sit with this and be like this. And this is just a part of my life until I or my loved one is ready to rise up and make a change.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that patience is what builds trust. Trust not only in spirit and the intelligence of the universe, but trust in oneself and their own integrity, and trust in a community, and trust in a relationship. So that's a big piece of how to discern which is which. Like when it started stewing inside of your head, you're like, what is the system to quantify how to identify when it's healthy and responsible to share, and when it's healthy and responsible to have discretion with a given piece of information or power or a skill or a tool. And I think, of course, it's on a case by case basis, but that lens of wisdom, it's kind of like your ability to have presence and stillness within yourself dictates your ability to determine what may be appropriate for someone else or a group outside of yourself.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was thinking of a story. I had a teacher one time give me like a roadmap of how to get to a particular school. And he kind of said that, you have to go to this like desert and wander like until you're like gonna collapse, and then you'll meet like two gentlemen, and they'll give you like a particular kind of test and they'll take you in, and then they'll open, like, if you pass this particular test, they'll open a doorway to this like parallel dimension of like a school, and like that's where you go to school to learn these certain things. And I can elaborate on that, but I mean that was a very like direct way of approaching it. I was like, wow, it's that simple, huh? And he's like, yeah, like here's the roadmap, here's where you go, and you have to do this journey if you want to go there. But I was like, wow, you really have to seek that out, in order to get there and to potentially die and fail, because a lot of it in the metaphorical story or reality or whatever, however you want to approach it, there was the failure in there too, of actually not making it to that point and then deciding whether or not you're worthy of, getting um, to that higher level or dimension of understanding, I guess.
It sounds kind of like Dune or Doctor Strange, like you know how the
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, something along those lines. But yeah, no, it was a serious roadmap of going to a different place, because I've always been like really, fascinated with certain storylines of different yogis, and finding this level of enlightenment and how they were able to learn these things, and where did you go for all these things, and yeah, I've met some really interesting people in my life, and it's crazy to hear that kind of stuff, because you know even though we see a lot of that stuff, like, I mean, I'll speak for myself, even like with Marvel or like those types of movies and stuff like that, I assure you I've seen some of that stuff firsthand, in my travels and meeting people. So I think it's all true to a certain extent once you're able to believe in that kind of stuff and see it firsthand.
I think people that don't want to be too on the nose write parables, and then that's the way that they share the information. It's encoded for those who are ready for it. So that's one
Mm,
way to apply that, like Agartha or inner Earth, like where the continental shelf opens up and the sort of like the sky is upside down and the radiant sun is the molten core, but the crystal at the center of the earth.
hmm
I'm kind of unclear on whether there's like the molten core and it's just way too hot to be there, and then there's like a 5D chamber where you elevate your dimensionality, and then
mm,
that's where a whole bunch of immortal beings are hanging out and talking to each other, and it doesn't as much dictate the environment on this earth here,
mm,
or if
hmm
it's actually just like gravity's upside down because now there's the gravity towards the crust instead of the gravity towards the core, and the core is actually some light crystal, but the density of the core of the earth is coming from like some layer deeper than the mantle but not all the way to the center. So is
mm,
it a physical thing, or is it a 5D overlaying reality that is accessed from sort of a higher dimensional transduction into crystal or light or what have you? So that's kind of the fun piece, like Journey to the Center of the Earth. There's another
mm,
one that's a fiction, but it's
hmm
kind of also like, is there an inner Earth and what are we missing? And then
yeah,
in realistic science today, not to say that that other stuff isn't, but approachable Western realistic science, there's this whole sea beneath part of the crust of the Earth that holds more energy, I mean, more water than the ocean. That's just
I've heard
recently been
this.
discovered.
Yep.
So it's kind of
And
fun how they blend.
hmm that is, yeah, it's it's definitely fascinating to hear the metaphorical stories and then apply them to some type of understanding or reality, or however you want to, you know all the different directions they can go. I remember at one point in my life, I was super into like Reiki. I was learning, I had achieved like my master's in Reiki, and there was one point I was in my house just meditating for most of the day on like being able, like, I guess like we are talking about, there's like this other layer, like crust, that they all kind of like hang out on, all like the Reiki masters, of like some now and some not around anymore, but are still there, like on that crust, kind of like all hanging out and talking. And I remember like meditating, and I had like an invite of they were kind of like, come on, like come hang out with us or whatever. And they're like, I could feel like like literally like the invite. I don't even know how else to approach it, but it was like so overwhelmingly immense that I wasn't able to like separate myself. This is also when I was like really young. I was like probably like in my early 20s. So I think it was like really immense to like to feel that, because there was like a level of separation that I had to create within myself to where like I'd be here, but then I'd also have to also be there. And I guess I just didn't know how to do that at that time, you
Mhm.
know? But I could, that was one time in my life where I was like, oh, I could feel what it means that those people, those beings have been able to um, learn how to separate themselves and distinguish themselves on that, those different planes of reality, you know? So like metaphorically, we're talking about all this stuff, but I do remember a point where I felt that, you know? Have I ever done that in this lifetime where I was able to like sit with those people? No. But I definitely remember like feeling that at a certain point. And I've had other experiences similar to that, but not that, if that makes any sense. So,
Yes, like kind of like astral projection, but like stabilizing it and being aware of the multidimensional self. But
mhm.
it's like maybe a cross crawling exercise when you pat your head and rub your belly at the same time.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's like that with the different layers of your consciousness, as if you could move them like distinct limbs instead of just be aware that they exist or hypothesize that they exist. It's a feeling relationship with multiple faculties that you're able to tap into. But I think there's like layers to build up to those skills unless you just get it in mediumship, like
Mhm.
like lucid dreaming before astral projection, for example. You just kind of get a hold, or I call it getting your sea legs in the trance.
Mhm. I think it's taken me a long time too through like I wouldn't say like astral projection, but more so like meditation. But I've been able to come to points through meditation where I kind of like disintegrate, if you will. I mean, like where I'm able to like um be in a state of mind where I can no longer see myself. You know, like I can put my hand like in front of my face kind of thing and it's just not there. And that's that when I started being able to like do that, it was a little terrifying, you know, and I could feel like my body like snap back into place because I was just like, oh my God, like why is my hand not there? You know what I mean? But I'm like, no, I'm there, you know, but it took me a while till I was like, oh, I can let go of this and I'm still here, you know, kind of thing. And I like I wish and I know that at some point in this life I'll get to that point again where I'm able to separate myself and hopefully get that invitation again, you know, and be ready for it. But I've trained myself to at least get um to that. And then I also have a couple other stories where I believe like I've done astral projection, even though like I've not really studied it. I've read about it, but not like, you know, gone through all the steps on it, if you will. You know, because I mean there's like full like I mean there's many steps to approach doing something like that. Have you ever had anything like that where you've like completely gone somewhere?
Yeah, plenty. I was studying it in college. I was really
Oh,
excited about
cool.
that stuff. And
So
I read it. Mhm.
oh, I was just gonna say I'd love to hear a story of something like that.
Sure. Um, so I was a little kid and I was reading these books called Animorphs, where they had like the bad guys were these like slug things that went in people's ears and took over their brains, and the good guys were like these centaurs with a scorpion tail that didn't have mouths and they crushed grass beneath their hooves to absorb nutrients. And the good guys were much weaker and they didn't have that many ships, and it was like the big dark empire of the weird little slug people. And the good guys had this cube, like this morph cube that I forget what it was called. It was this glowing blue cube that looks like the Tesseract in Marvel these days.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids touched it, like these young kids that became aware of this invasion or whatever. And then they could touch these animals and turn into them. And if they stayed that way for 2 hours, it'd get stuck. So they had to
Ooh.
be careful with the time and be careful not to get like hunted by the aliens. And they were trying to just like save the world from this massive invasion of these sneaky little slug aliens. And it
Mm-hmm.
just kind of, there was this one where this kid Tobias ended up getting stuck as a hawk, and I really connected to his character because he was kind of like moody and broody and separate, and I had all the spiritual sensitivity, and the people around me and my family and my society on the East Coast when I was a kid couldn't really relate to most of that. So it's like, all right, I could be like a little bit moody and broody like that guy. And then he just got stuck as a totally different creature. I'm like, I already feel like a totally different creature. So I had
Hmm.
this dream, and there was a school bus, and in college I was popular, but I got kind of made fun of in school before that. And I like turned into a hawk in the dream on the school bus and then flew out the back and the doors opened and then I was flying around. And I had plenty of flying dreams since then. But that's when I first got the idea like maybe I could do this in real life. And like instead of flying around the dream, I could fly around real life, but with my dream body. Like that's a step. And I feel like I've been being communicated with by higher consciousness my entire life. But sometimes it was more on the nose when I was open to it, and sometimes it was more like flirting through the metaphors of things that feel safe and understandable to me when I was more like closed off in the mind and heart and going through things. So then fast forward to just before college, and I'm studying this book, Mastering Astral Projection, where you bounce energy through these different channels and you learn to ride the edge of the alpha state. And then right before you separate, you get this like whoa, like this crazy rush of sound that's hard to describe and vibration, like physical sensation of the nerves too. And it jolts you and you either fall asleep or you like wake up startled. But when you learn to stay calm through that whoa, that weird little portal into it, your astral body detaches from the physical body and there's still what they call the silver cord. And sometimes you can see that, sometimes not, but it's there unless your soul is leaving your body. And you can travel around.
Hmm.
And it's a lot safer if you kind of do it in prayer and create like this intentional bubble of grace because you just kind of go towards whatever you focus on without really an awareness of how that works at first. But the first one, I floated over these guys, Chase and Povilis, this Lithuanian guy and the Senegalese guy that I was friends with, and I floated through the roof of this house sideways because I didn't really know how to steer my astral body. It was just kind of going with the direction I was focusing in, like by accident. And I heard this whole conversation in real life. So I've been doing this later in college with a lot crazier stories than this, but this was like the first accidental one. So I floated out of my bed in the attic where a few of us stayed, this place that we were renting. And they were getting out of the car and having this full conversation. And I remembered it. So they came in and I was like, everyone be quiet. I used some of the Eastern slang, which is like swears and blunt language because everyone kind of talks like that there. I mean, not everyone, but a lot of the guys when I was that age. And then it's like, be quiet. And don't ask me why because you won't believe me, but tell me exactly what you just said to each other outside. And like the windows were closed and it was far away and it wasn't like a physical sound, like I was half asleep hearing a conversation. It was like I was wide awake, floating right over them. And what they said to me was exactly what they had just spoken to each other. I was like, okay, so this is a legitimate way to access the world. And then I started to kind of explore and I learned about the psyops programs in the military. Like the CIA's released a whole bunch of stuff about psychic reconnaissance through astral projection and other psychic projects for military purposes. And I didn't have any military purposes in mind, but I did want to explore human potential and like just kind of alternative ways to relate to people. Like, what can I teach myself? And what if this is in the world? Like, what if this is some valuable thing that I can offer? So that was my first one. I just heard a conversation and then validated it with the guys that I heard it from that it actually happened verbatim to what I'd heard. And then that kind of sparked further experiments with lucid dreaming and astral projection. And the next, if anyone listening to this is curious about how to access that stuff, the book Mastering Astral Projection helped me. And then also, should I share that one? It's called Tibetan Dream Yoga,
Uh-huh.
and I'll leave it at that. But it's this way to work with lucid dreams to then enter the real world and enact healing. And then you get validation based on the healing that people receive in the real world or this layer of the dream.
Hmm. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I love when, anybody refers different, books or information that help guide people along the way too. I'll definitely look into that myself. It's very fascinating to me because it's come to me. Certain things like that have happened to me a couple different times in my life, but I've not like really studied it. and there's been a couple times where it's been a little abrasive too, like where like I'll come back to my body and I'm like, there's part of me still not there, it's still like floating around or whatever, and it's not fun, like when you're like frozen and you like
Mhm.
everything's still kind of coming back into
Right.
place. You there?
If you try to move, it's kind of like having, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
It's kind of like having pins and needles, but where you can't move. They call it sleep paralysis because you're still
Hmm.
in the same state, but you're aware of your body. You're like, oh, I'm not technically paralyzed. I'm just temporarily paralyzed. And if I focused really hard, I could probably come back faster, but I'm using the impulses to move my body with my nerve and nothing's happening
Yes. And
because
it
it's
the
in the astral body.
Yeah, and it's an intense when it first happens to you to get used to that. I remember the first time that happened to me and I came back, I like got violently like ill. Like I ran to the bathroom and was like puking like right away because I was just like it was such a shocker to me, like when I was lying there and I'm like get up, and then like or breathe or you know what I mean? And then when I like I came back, I was like, "Oh my gosh." And then I was like, it's yeah, it's immense for anybody that's had that experience. I mean, like to start off like that, but I think that's again why, those that information, those practices are necessary so that you can fully understand and not be afraid or, use those tools, especially to feel it out and not be afraid if it does naturally happen, you know. But yeah, and so especially like the whole like transformational thing too. I had a beautiful experience on a train with a shaman that did a like kind of like a guided rhythmic sequence of breathing um and it's hard to explain. Um, I but I guess you know what I'm talking about, like getting yourself into that state and then connect. And so the whole point of like this particular session was like finding like an animal spirit guide, I guess, if you will. And so I really connected like with this eagle, and it was really cool because like I became the eagle, and I was like flying around doing like eagle stuff. And then it was so cool because there was a moment where I was flying and I was the eagle, and I could feel what it was like to think and feel all the different aspects of being that particular creature. But I think the one thing that resonated with me the most is like there was a fish, and like the fish spoke to me that it was going to be eaten. And there's like this communication between both of us that like I was to like fly down and like eat it. But it was almost like this natural occurrence of like reciprocation, I guess, if you will. It's like it's hard to describe, but it was like the fish knew it was meant to happen, and I knew it was meant to happen, and it was like a giving of oneself in that connection in that moment. And it was so beautiful too because even like when I caught the fish, I could taste what the fish tasted like through the eagle's perspective. And it was like so immensely like beautiful, the whole like communication of like nature and just like um the communication as a whole. I think we have such more humans have such a separation of a thing, like when you're eating, like it's right in front of you, but there's not a lot of communication unless you actually raised the animal, if you will, so there's a level of like understanding behind it. But in this moment, like I felt there was like a level of communication on both sides, and it was like a beautiful embrace kind of thing. And it wasn't like I'm gonna kill this thing. It was a reciprocation, I
Hmm.
guess. Does that make sense at all? But it was
Yeah.
really cool. And then when I came out of it, I was like, oh, that was such a beautiful, immensely introspective moment to understand the uh the insight through something else's eyes, if you will. So yeah, I've had two experiences like that in my life with doing something like that. But I would definitely like to learn more of what it takes to potentially travel outside of this planet or inside this planet.
Mhm.
I think that's super fascinating stuff. Do you have any I don't know, now I'm just like stimulated by that. Do you have any like experiences where you've gone like way out there by chance? Like
Most of my life.
really? Like no, I like so that's so cool. I mean, uh I'm so fascinated in that. Have you traveled to any other planets or like met any other types of beings or anything like that?
Sure. I really identify with Sirius B. So the theory behind that, you know who the Dogon tribe is in
Yes.
Africa?
Hmm.
So
I
there's
do.
these accurate, their ancient cave drawings have these accurate star charts, and it's thousands of years old. You know, people don't always believe in us getting high technology and then ruining it, or like ancient aliens having high technology and sharing it with us. But there's proof of one of these to some degree because there's accurate star charts. And I feel like the North Star is Sirius B. It's like this brightest one in the sky. But they have Sirius A that's a huge star, and Sirius B that's like kind of a blue dwarfier one, and then Sirius C that's tiny.
Hmm.
I think might be a white dwarf. And a trinary star system, meaning three stars, where we have one, our sun, soul. And so supposedly this one goes pretty deep, but it's like the universe is like a heartbeat, and the Big Bang isn't just like this one thing. It's like it goes out and then it coalesces back like a
Hmm.
heartbeat. And they say that the center of the galaxy, like the supermassive black hole that's a lot smaller than the Big Bang, is every 26,000 years is half of a heartbeat, like the masculine one that goes dunk, and then it's dunk dunk is the whole thing, and that would be two 26,000 year cycles, dunk dunk, the masculine one out, radiating, and the feminine one kind of inward, and they have these different effects. So now we go to the divine science by, I don't want to say Sri Yukteswar. I always say Sri Yukteswar and pronounce it wrong, but Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's teacher, Yogananda from Autobiography of a Yogi, he wrote this book called The Divine Science. And Yogananda and Sri Yukteswar and Lahiri Mahasaya were all directly contacted by this immortal being named Babaji, and he's a yogi who just kind of ascended, and he was like, all right, I'm gonna go take off and be a wave on the cosmic current. And his sister Mataji was like, no. She's like, stay and leave a copy of yourself here and keep helping people. He's like, okay, I'll stay until the end of the age, and that's like thousands of years to commit to being around on earth. And so talk about like Jesus or Quetzalcoatl and his bride Quetzal, or Krishna. Supposedly every 2,500 years or so, Buddha, there is a world teacher. But now our consciousness is like too big and diverse for that. So it's a collective consciousness. Like Buddha Maitreyu is the future Buddha with the blue hair and the gold skin, but it's a collective consciousness instead of just one dude. And then the Second Coming of the Christ Within You is a book by Paramahansa Yogananda. It's like as thick as War and Peace. That's the one after Autobiography of a Yogi, and he like translates the teachings of Christ, but kind of like through the ascended master sense, like what it actually means, and filtering
Hmm.
out the dogma. And
Yep.
it's not the same as the Indian perspective, but it's still like about the progression of consciousness and how he studied all these different mystical traditions from around the world. And it's that second coming of the Christ within you. So it's not as religious, it's more about the direct spiritual approach and what that means for the collective. So this is related to Sirius B because we're supposedly in this karmic triangle between the Pleiadians. Why so serious? I'm just Pleiadian around. That's a fun
Hmm.
one. The Pleiadians, the Syrians, and humans, the Earthlings. And humans are supposed to be like the young primitive species that's getting guided. I believe that we kind of rise and fall. But they did like the fire of the gods Prometheus type thing. The Pleiadians gave us technology that we maybe weren't ready for, and their spiritual and technological growth had to stop or slow down because they got this karma from giving us power that we didn't know how to use. So some of our problems were their responsibility. So they want to help us selflessly because they always did, but they also want to like help us to come back into harmony with their own growth. And then the people on Sirius B, they like live inside the star, and they're not fully physical, but they're not fully spiritual. It's kind of like an energy body, not just a light body that's totally our typical blueprint reality with no energy, just pure consciousness. So it's They exist in this energetic state, like these little spheres, but they have access to all of their parallel lives. So it's not like past life regression, future life progression, things like that, and forgetting. It's like they're the sum total of the knowledge of their soul. And if
Mm,
spirit is the trunk of the tree that includes all knowledge and all experience, then the soul is like the sum total of all the individual incarnations that one might identify with. And as you untie these knots of who you are, then you get access to more of it and you get, quote, an older soul. But spirit is timeless. It's like a newborn infant in every moment, but also like more ancient than ancient at the same time. And that's kind of like the truth of our nature. But our soul is like the most that we have the capacity to identify with now as we are. In the Kabbalah, they have like Sof, which is God within form that's learning, like the totality of all being within time and space and all dimensions. And they
mm,
have Ein Sof, which is like above the tree of life in the highest point. And that's like God beyond form that's already perfected and desireless and kind of in harmony with all potentiality in a single moment. So on Sirius B, it's not quite that far. But imagine that some souls kind of like stop being a soul and just go back to spirit and they don't die because there's anything bad. They just feel satisfied with all of their individuality and desires. And those of us that are very stubborn and continue to reincarnate in many complex forms and shapes, um, we continue to exist in creative forms. And sometimes it's not just like reincarnate somewhere else. It's like I want to experience a lot faster because I don't want to stay limited. And it's kind of getting like a little bit old and jaded to be stuck in a limited self when I'm getting closer and closer to spirit. But I have these certain attachments about beingness. So I'm not able to dissolve fully into spirit just yet. So a lot of really old souls that don't get enlightened in like that standard whatever million years of reincarnation that you hear about in some yogic scriptures. And then with spiritual practice, it might happen a little faster. But a million years is like the natural process without meditation or prayer or spiritual practice, where the consciousness just evolves to be maybe not all the way back to spirit or enlightened fully, but like a light being and on a subtler plane of reality, kind of like minerals becoming plants, becoming animals, becoming human over time as the consciousness evolves. So it's what you might call star elders that live there. So when the
mm.
Big Bang coalesces, and I am circling all these points together, believe it or not,
I know you are.
beautiful. When
Yep.
the Big Bang coalesces instead of just going outward, usually the beings find like peace and absolution and exist on kind of like a higher plane of consciousness or just incarnate in a different cycle. But those that continue to exist, they kind of hold their form in a way. And in this universe, it took the form of Sirius B, like the guiding light or the true north, but not just the North Star that's physically the guiding light, but the metaphor for, spirits whose resonance guide newer souls, which really just means those that don't remember as much, because we're all actually the timeless spirit in singularity and solidarity and beauty. But it's our free will choice to not fully remember that and to explore more limited realms of reality. So on Sirius B, you're like your body's like a sphere of energy and you're on a star instead of a planet and you're actually existing within it. So it's like instead of inner Earth, it's inner Sirius.
Mm,
And when you touch someone, it's like deeper than making love, but it's also like just a handshake. It's how you greet every being there. And you overlap with each other's sphere, each other's energy body. And all of their parallel lives, or if you want to call it past lives and existences and whatnot so far, and all of yours become downloaded into the synergistic sum total of who you both are. And then you keep moving in the general direction that you were going. You can't tell if it was like an instant or an eon, and you're downloading all these old soul memories, and you either stay there until you dissolve back into spirit or you go incarnate in a more traditional reality that's a little less multidimensional, a little more grounded and focused. And so it's a way of accelerating like the oldness of your soul to kind of get what you're looking for without having to go through it one at a time. It's a very fast multidimensional transmission, and it happens from the core of the star to everyone who's there. And then it also happens soul to soul as you overlap with each other and have these sort of readings. And when you move away from each other, you're the sum total of all of each other's experience. So it's almost like you're clones of the synergistic amalgamation of both of you. But then
mm,
as you go on connecting to other souls, you become different again because they might overlap some different ones than you if they continue until you leave. So I had this sort of soul memory of being in that blue star and having my energy body and having this experience and being this old soul with like beauty and ancientness and power, but also like the issues of feeling like displaced and alien and not ascending when everyone else in my generation of souls did, and
Mm-hmm.
being around. And then, here I am, really different. I don't just feel like I'm some alien from Sirius B. I feel like we all have different genetics, terrestrial and otherwise. Um, and I feel like we have different ratios based on what our soul's going through. So in the divine science, Yukatswar talks about the yugas, kind of like the age of Aquarius that all the new age people talk about and stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
also like the radiation of God and like the higher intelligence goes up in golden ages, and then the fastest way to awaken is silent meditation, and it goes down in the dark ages. And I forget the fastest way to awaken during that. But right now, like on the way up or on the way down, mantra is supposed to be the fastest way to awaken because all the ambient chaos isn't as strong as the dark ages, but it's not as peaceful as the golden ages. So if you have some sort of a mantra, then it helps to hold your focus on peace. And if you can chant it silently without losing focus, it's supposed to be stronger, but that's a big if. You
Mm-hmm.
might develop eventually, or you might not need to. And I see awakening less as a goal and more as a natural process. But Sirius
Same.
B is a place that holds space. That's beautiful. Sirius B is more of like a place that holds space for these old souls, and then these old souls hold space for the universe and share in resonance. Where usually, a soul that old just kind of collapses into spirit and feels satisfied with all of its existence. But I wouldn't necessarily call it stubborn, like I said recently, but those that are just thirsty for experience and don't feel like, oh, I see the total benevolence and perfection in everything. So I lose my desire to have a personal experience or a personal beingness. And then I can just disseminate my self awareness to all of spirit within and beyond time and space. And it's like they call those things in yoga the gunas or the psychic knots. There's the conditional love, the conditional identity, and the conditional desire. And they loosen as we live. And take pleasure and feel full for more diverse things and feel love for more diverse things that eventually becomes unconditional and feel identity with more and more things, like old, young, masculine, feminine, male, female, here, alien, nationalism. All these things just start to dissolve the borders and the love and the sense of self, and the direct perception becomes broader until it disseminates to everything. And it's kind of fun. And if you wanted to, you could come back, but it's this weird paradox because you're beyond desire. So it's kind of difficult to contemplate higher dimensional states past a certain point without being ready to experience them.
So then how did, like, that being said, what decision did make you come back? When you get there, and then like what retention are you able to take back with you of like what you learned, or at least the experience that you had from, being able to communicate, or almost not even communicate, being able to like integrate with these other, like orbs, like, and these memories, and like these distances of time, like like if there's anything that you could express from, coming back from that, and, being able to become part of these other, souls and beings, like what would you say, like you could express at least in this podcast? I know, because I mean, I'm sure there's like so much, but I'm just so fascinated, like when you're able to like sync up, and then like, because I've had different experiences like that, but then it's like how to even express, those moments in time, because like you said, it's like, was it a second, or was I there for like an eternity?
Hmm.
And then communicating that.
I think it's kind of about the relevance of the group or individual. So directly, I'm speaking to you, and indirectly, I'm speaking to whoever listens to the podcast now and
Hmm.
throughout the future. But if I was given the power to speak and not sleep for my entire lifetime, I couldn't approach a small percentage of it, but I can distill little pieces of it that are relevant to who I'm speaking to.
Hmm.
And there's like the opening of these psychic powers called cities, like they just kind of come to you naturally. Our natural state is kind of like all the powers of God in a way, but just like you don't give a car without a governor to a kid without a license.
Hmm.
Like people aren't meant to have certain memories and experiences. And there's ways to force it to a small degree, which then causes negative side effects. And then when you're patient, you get the same gifts without the negative side effects, and you can continue to build upon them.
Mm,
So some of these would just be like reading thoughts and reading emotions and basic stuff, but some of it is directly what we were just talking about, like astral projection or lucid dreaming or insight into the consciousness of a society, being able to see the future, not just through predictive history,
mm,
but directly, because you're not a psychic who's seeing timelines, but you don't know what's real, like the trajectory of a ball, but which way is the wind going to blow?
mm,
You get the prophecy of exactly where the wind's going to blow and exactly where it's going to go. But you're
mm,
only able to do that because you're peaceful. You're not
mhm,
excited and you're not afraid. And when you maintain that equanimity, it's not the disassociation of detachment where you can go to higher realms, but you're also ignoring your soul themes and you come crashing back down. Detachment, think about it. But then there's equanimity where you have kind of that peaceful energy as if you're detached. You're not reacting by instinct, but you still care. So you have the space to contemplate and the space to act from grounded wisdom in the heart with patience. And you still have the will to act, just not the obligation or compulsion to act prematurely or immaturely. So I think equanimity is a good one that can be expressed in general and the
mhm.
value of it. And also that awakening is a process as opposed to a goal, and to enjoy the beauty of life as it is. Like the very cliche, the journey is not just the destination, but every moment of the travel. So
Yeah.
really valuing that the destination itself is multidimensional and encompasses every moment of the journey in singularity. So the destination includes everything before you feel like you got there. Like you're already there and there's a reason that you don't know it or feel it fully yet to give flavor to the journey. Like
Mhm.
time in a linear sense is an illusion, but multidimensional existence is a bunch of these illusions stacked on top of each other. An omnidimensional awareness, which omni just means all, like omnipresent, omnibenevolent, omniscient, all loving, all knowing, all powerful, our true nature. But we're like censoring it on purpose and forgetting that we're having it or censoring it on purpose with purpose.
Yep.
So I like the word metaphor because meta means beyond. Like if you have north, south, east, west, and it's a flat piece of paper and it's a plane, then 5D, let's say, not
Mhm.
5G, 5D would be deeper and higher. So that's transcendence.
Mm,
That's a thing in numerology as well. And it's just like moving beyond is what meta means, like metaphor, or trying to not mention the metaverse over here, but
mhm.
and four, north, south, east, west, as I said, is like in an extreme stagnation, but in a small way is healthy. It's earth energy, like the base of a pyramid. And metaphor, beyond stability or beyond purpose, beyond what we think it's for, beyond the purpose that we currently understand. Metaphor is higher consciousness speaking to us. So that's why, like in song and poetry and interpretive dance, people can say things that are a lot deeper, like a layered joke that unwraps itself later. And higher consciousness can speak to you like time released medicine that lasts a long time and unfurls its gifts over time. So life is like that. And every moment of the journey isn't just potentially beautiful and part of the destination, it's incredibly valuable. And the meaning hiding inside the patterns of life and the moments of life is sublime. So it's not so much like a forceful command to pay attention, but just a reminder that being present in the moment and being unpretentious and opening the heart is so valuable. And
Yes.
that the beauty of how everything in life fits together is indescribable even by the most articulate tongue. And it's only felt through a language that I like to call telepathy, which is instead of telepathy with thoughts, it's a direct transmission of feeling. But we're
Mhm.
not talking to each other as separate beings. We're talking to ourselves from a diverse state of consciousness and enjoying this kind of divine schizophrenia until one awakens and integrates the singularity of all the selves being one and all the different perspectives. If you've ever seen the movie Iron Man and he gets kidnapped by those terrorists and they want him to build a missile, so he pretends to build the missile. And then he builds like one missile is an arm and one missile is a leg and one missile is the center of his Iron Man suit. And then, it looks like he's building a missile. And every time they spy on him, they're like, okay, he's making the blueprints of this bomb that we want. And then ultimately, he puts all the pieces of the missile together and they form the Iron Man suit and not like some weapon of mass destruction that he built out of fear. and it's like a weapon that can protect him and help him be a superhero. And all the little missile blueprints align to be like the legs and the arms and the center and the head, and they fit together. And it's like that. That's the meta. That's the beyond the purpose that it looks like it's intended for. All these things are like breaking apart our ego and challenging our sense of self and stability, which seems scary, but it's also serving the deeper sense of self and serving like the true desires of the soul that one may or may not be aware of.
There you are.
Illuminating.
Yes, very illuminating. I felt like we had a little telepathy session right there too, because I was like, I really hope he gets to this point, and then you just kept on like touching on exactly what I was wanting to say. So thank you so much.